Just shoot your gun. Thanks for watching. Wrong! Legion isn't about just shooting his big gun. It may be simple to judge such a big guy, and well, I won't deny, a lot of his gameplay is just... And on the other side of the spectrum, you've got people who think the opposite and think Legion gameplay is just this. But it's not just those one-off experiences that dictate the entirety of Legion's existence, but rather it's the knowledge that you have in order to make yourself the best you can be that makes, well, any Titan fun. And so you clicked on this video and you've seen the length of it. This is basically Legion. One of the first things that comes up when you play really any Titan is, what am I doing? Legion at first glance seems relatively simple. You have a powerful minigun, a gun shield, 5 bars of health, and your Powershot does a really good amount of damage.
Oh yeah, it's on the front line. That's wrong.
Kind of. It's all about how you decide to frontline. W-keying forward in any game isn't exactly the best tactic, and in Titan combat, while it may net you an undeserved kill here or there, you lose out on a lot of combat potential if, in turn, you end up taking a lot of damage. Now, Legion with his 5 bars of health can tank a decent bit, but if you're not playing him right, then it's easy for all that extra health to just vanish. Therefore, the certain playstyle I'm going to talk about is, I think, the most ideal way to play Legion, and that is playing defensively offensive. Legion's main selling point is his gun, right? And with his gun comes his power. By simply revving up your gun, you created a bubble of influence wherever you look. Hearing that rev up sound, your enemies will know you're ready to output damage and will have to react accordingly. This is where playing defensively offensive will come in handy. While Legion does have the ability to push forward and create space, it often leaves him vulnerable, and because he's so slow, if you overextend and need to fall back, you're gonna have a real hard time doing so. Therefore, it's important to keep an eye on your surroundings and look for the best moments to move your bubble influence up front or back down. So things like cover and corners will be your best friend. Think of yourself as a gatekeeper. As long as you exist there, nobody's going to be able to brute force their way in without some sort of pushback from you. And that pushback comes in the form of your power shots. I'll talk about weapons and abilities in depth later, but your power shot is the most important tool to holding areas and denying enemy pushes. In fact, I think it's fair to say that most of Legion's fundamentals can all be attributed to power shot, so be aware. Make sure you use the power shot in moderation, because if you're caught without it, well, you're basically holding an overglorified XO16. Alongside your power shot, your other most important tool is your dash. If you're not running turbo engine, that's a whole 10 seconds of not moving fast when you need it. As your only movement tool, it's so important to have it on hand when you're pushing up or retreating, because oftentimes it'll be your only tool to get out of sticky situations. It's especially important since Legion slows down considerably when aiming and firing his gun, so you don't want to feel like you're stuck in mud. Now, one thing that often gets overlooked when it comes to, well, actually, this entire game itself, is positioning. And I mean, why would you care, since the most appealing part of this game is being able to get from point A to point B in a matter of seconds. So when people transition from that high-octane pilot gameplay to the slower and more methodical combat of the Titans, oftentimes they're still stuck with their brain on autopilot telling them to keep moving forward no matter what. But for a Titan like Legion, being in the wrong place at the wrong time can spell certain death. Unlike the other chassis types, both Legion and Scorch were unfortunate enough to be the slowest, meaning that they're already at a disadvantage when it comes to being able to have good positioning. Legion is in an even worse position though compared to Scorch, because if you're constantly having to reposition as a Legion, that means the less time your bubble of influence will be up, aka your gun being revved up, the less value you'll end up having overall. So with that, Legion has to juggle between picking a good position and being able to actually hold that position. When it comes to picking where you want to hold down the fort, there are a few key things you'll want to ask yourself. 1. What value do I bring by holding this position? 2. Is there a fallback option? 3. Where is this position located relative to the enemy team and your friendlies? And number 4. Whether or not you can afford to push up when the time is right. Places where you can see stuff like the enemy's spawn and places where you have line of sight to an objective or high value target like a battery are also things you should think about as well. You also have to worry about pilots. Legions are very powerful in close range and in long range, but once you start to approach that middle ground, it can feel pretty awkward to play. Okay. Good pilots will take advantage of that range, and so they'll stay just outside of your effective close range power shot one tap, but they'll be close enough so the zoom in from the precise long range mode will be cumbersome to use. Therefore, it's important to keep away from close tight knit areas and areas that you can't see much of from one spot. The most common spots that you'll probably sit close to are basically any corners. Corners can serve as a spot to quickly duck behind cover, and depending on where they're located, it can make it pretty easy to snuff out any unwanted guests. Getting into the habit of getting into these good positions is essential to the Legion playstyle, and is the reason why he can feel so polarizing to play sometimes. Oh, wait a minute. Alright, you guys won't believe this, but the reason why Legion can feel so weak sometimes is because enemies can see him. Wow! Stupid bit aside, there's that one age-old golden rule of multiplayer shooter gaming, and it's that it's a whole lot easier to kill a guy when they didn't even know you were there. While Legion may not be built for flanking, if you're playing defensively offensive and you find those opportunities where you can surprise your enemy, you can deal amazing amounts of damage. And even if you don't get the finish on a Titan, as long as you can hit one good power shot, that'll be more than enough for your troubles. However, this usually comes at the risk of abandoning a power position and possibly your allies. So of course, before you go trekking halfway across the map for that juicy flank, make sure you can actually afford to do so. Now just like any other Titan, there are some maps that Legion is great at, and there are some maps where he kinda just sucks. Generally, you'll want maps to have decent sightlines with good surroundings to be able to cover yourself and control with. Also, as a general rule of thumb, you never really want to go down the middle of any map since you're slow and you end up becoming a huge target. And so, I have created a tier list, which is ultimately pretty lazy, but hey, it's quick and easy. Starting off, we've got some of the best maps. All these maps have pretty good sightlines, and they each have good power positions that Legions can control from. For example, the bridge on Blackwater can be head glitched, so that's really strong, and on a map like Drydock, Legion can completely stall a push on one of the side lanes. Now these next maps aren't that bad, but the reason I put them lower is because it's easier for pilots on these maps to harass them from things like buildings and high ground. And finally, we got the worst maps. Of course, it's still possible to pop off a Legion in these maps, but overall, these maps are just too limiting, and while you can probably just sit in a corner pretty effectively, that requires the enemy to actually come to you first. These maps are also where Legion's natural enemies happen to excel. Aside from that though, in general, if you're looking for good positions to hold, make sure you have adequate space to move, enough space to react to different threats like pilots and titans, a good amount of natural cover, a good amount of space to control with your gun, and a fallback option. Oh, and like I said earlier, it's important you don't go down crowded areas since you can easily get ganged up on. Now, there's a cool gameplay mechanic that's often not used properly. You see, when you load into a match of Titanfall 2, the game gives you these helpful AIs known as teammates. Alongside you, they can fight, drop titans, and can even win games for you. Meta commentary aside, it's important to not forget that you can rely on your teammates to support all the shortcomings you may have, or at least they can be good disposable decoys. Now personally, I don't think Titans will be your number one enemy as Legion, but rather your main concern should be pilots. Think of them as mosquitoes. While individually, they may not be no more than an itch, all these bites can add up over time. And if you're caught up alone, it's actually pretty easy to get overwhelmed if you don't know what you're doing, or if you're in an awkward position. Fuck! As an Ogre class Titan, you're basically a free walking Titan meter, and because of your big size, you're easy to spot and harass. Therefore, you should make sure that at least you're close by to a teammate, or hell, even some minions. If your friendly pilots have some sort of spatial awareness, it can be pretty easy for them to deal with any enemy pilot that comes trying to damage you, especially since those enemy pilots will most likely be too preoccupied in damaging you than in focusing on anything else in their surroundings. As for minions, while they can't really help out in terms of actually killing anything, oftentimes they can spot pilots pretty easily, so if you pay attention to where they're looking and what they're saying, sometimes you can anticipate a pilot before they even get a chance to see you. The exception to that is the Reaper, which can, funnily enough, be a great deterrent. Friendly Titans can also serve as an alternate punching bag besides you, and well, 2 Titans are better than 1, so if you do a good job of covering each other's backs, it'll definitely help you out in the long run. That's why it's important to always keep track of where your teammates are so you either can fall back to them, or you can help even the odds in their own little 1v1. Alright, so I know I joked about Legion being basically just a walking talking gun, but come on, just look at this guy. With 5 bars of health, the slow movement speed, and 1 10-second dash, you might as well just pretend you're a sentry. In a vacuum, Legion's primary, the Predator Cannon, is probably one of the strongest primaries in the game, if not the strongest, based on DPS alone. With a base mag of 100 rounds, he can deal a very decent chunk of damage if all shots hit, and even more so if he hits some critical shots. It's also the only other hitscan Titan primary in the game. But this all comes at the drawback of a pretty wide hipfire and the need to rev up the gun before you can start firing. All in all, I think this is fair, and plus, it creates a need for the skill to decide when to rev or not rev your gun in the middle of combat. However, if the Predator Cannon was just that, Legion would no doubt be a lot more boring and a lot more predictable. This is where Legion's Tactical comes in. Well, if you could even call it that. While other Titans have actual tools in their tactical slot like tripwires or movement abilities, Legion's whole thing is, pressing a button. This button has power though. With one click, Legion's Predator Cannon initiates a mode switch into long range mode. So instead of the stupid inaccurate rounds, you got these beautiful precision shots. It isn't all sunshine and rainbows though, because this has its drawbacks as well. For one, there's a little animation that plays when you switch modes, which combined with the rev up time of the gun, it can honestly really screw you up if you keep switching in the wrong place at the wrong time. For two, you're forced into this long zoom, which is good if you're trying to shoot somebody far away, but this creates tunnel vision. And as a Legion, it's pretty important to keep an eye on your surroundings, especially since it takes a decent time for you to deal with unexpected threats. And for three, these super awesome precision rounds take up 2 shots instead of 1. Do they do any extra damage? No, but that's the price you'll pay for those crit shots. So if you put 2 and 2 together, it's obvious that you'll need to learn how to manage the close range mode and the long range mode together. Up next is Legion's offensive ability, Gun Shield. At first glance, this feels like something you would consider OP. Being able to dish out massive amounts of damage alongside a protective shield at your disposal? Sign me up. But if you actually look closer, you can begin to see that, wow, maybe this thing isn't so great after all. So let's break it down. Upon activation, you're still allowed to shoot, switch modes, and Powershot. That's fine. But the gun shield also prevents you from being able to sprint in melee. That is a massive downside. Sprinting is what allows you to fall back and reposition, obviously. And while being able to not melee doesn't sound too bad at first, your fist can become the most important tool in dire times. Without your melee, you can't execute, push back Titans when your power shot isn't up, and you also can't melee pin those pesky Ronins. In a lot of scenarios, if you end up putting your gun shield up at the wrong time, you're actually just guaranteeing your swift demise. To add insult to injury, you can't cancel the shield when it's put up, and even if it's destroyed, Legion suddenly acts like he has schizophrenia, and he pretends that his shield is still up, which means you still can't punch or run. I'm not even done yet though. While Gun Shield does cover a majority of the front of your body, it doesn't cover all of it. The 2 main spots to look out for are your feet and your shoulder. The shoulder is especially important since a part of it is actually considered a crit spot. Plus, if an enemy is close enough, they can just shoot past your shield anyway. Of course, there are ways to cover those spots if you look a certain way or crouch, but you have to be aware that this comes at the cost of maybe not being able to aim where you want, or moving even slower than you already were going when you were revved up. There are also certain abilities that can completely decimate a gun shield in barely a few seconds. Arc Wave, Tone's tracking rockets, and even Rocket Salvo can outright trivialize the entirety of Gun Shield's existence. Despite all of that though, Gun Shield still does have a few upsides. Blocking a good 90 to 95% of your front body is still great for forcing enemies to have to focus on your open spots, and it's also great as a deterrent to even fighting you in the first place. Also, a great technique to get into the habit of with Gun Shield is to look straight up when something like an Arc Wave comes barreling at you. By looking up, you can avoid the Arc Wave hitting your gun shield, which saves it from instant obliteration. Of course, I'm a controller scrub, so I can't really look up that quickly, but PC players, you'll want to make a note of that. Interestingly enough, if you look down, you can also block firewalls, although I admit, I've never seen it in person. I'll be honest, learning when to pop gun shield optimally can be pretty hard at first, since I feel most people are hardwired to immediately activate it once they see a threat. Gun shield will do a hell of a lot more though if you use it in moderation. And now the main bread and butter of Legion's kit, the Powershot. With the Powershot changing properties based on what range mode you're running on the Predator Cannon, after a brief windup, Legion will spit out some bullets for a meaty chunk of damage. In close range, the Powershot basically becomes a really powerful shotgun blast with the extra perk of some knockback. This becomes really important in those in-your-face duels because as Legion, the fight basically forces your opponent to play a guessing game of, when is he going to Powershot? One good power shot is usually enough to swing a fight in your favor, and that's why it's so important to keep an eye on your resources and your opponent. To balance this though, remember how I mentioned the brief windup earlier? Unfortunately for Legion, this windup is pretty visible, and very much reactable, so depending on what Titan you're facing, your trump card can be nullified pretty easily. That's why learning techniques like charging up a power shot before you dash out a corner are essential to gain a deeper understanding of Legion. On the other side of the spectrum, close range power shot is going to be your go-to #1 pilot killing tool. With a decent one-shot cone, don't be afraid to dish out a power shot on a poor pilot if you don't see any other Titans around. Or hell, use it anyways since pilots can become a real pain in the butt if you don't deal with them immediately. It's also a great tool if you're lazy and want to clear out some grunts, or if you want to dispatch a Reaper quickly. The long-range Powershot is basically if you were holding Northstar's railgun. It turns your Powershot into a projectile, and I didn't even know this until writing the script, but it also has an explosive AoE as well. Of course, the explosion radius is honestly too small to make even practical use of, but an upside is an upside. Assuming you're using this at the intended ranges, you can treat this as a pure damage dealer. Mimicking Northstar's gameplay pretty much one-to-one here, you'll want to aim for crit shots, and you'll also need to account for the projectile's travel time because trust me, you will miss. Oh, and do note that both of these require ammo in the Predator cannon, so make sure you're not at 0 before you attempt to fire. And finally, we have Smart Core. It's pretty simple. At the press of a button, you now have aimbot, infinite ammo, and a hidden 20% damage bonus increase. This is good and all, but if you have no idea what you're doing, Smart Core can easily become just as useless as
You are.
Okay, wow, that was really mean. Easily the best thing about Smart Core is the amount of area control you have. Unless your name is Tone, or if there's another Legion, once Smart Core is activated, you basically have free reign over whichever direction you decide to look. That's why it's important not to use it as your first option when engaging in a fight. The key is making your opponents overextend into thinking you're in a corner, or right before you run out of ammo to extend the fight. However, I also want to talk about the other Titans here for just a quick second. I name dropped Tone and Legion earlier because they are the only ones who can completely stop the damage output of your core. While a 20% damage boost is decent, it's not good enough to overwhelm a particle wall or a gun shield. Plus, Smart Core aims for the center of Titans, so there's no way to target exposed limbs. So if you plan on popping it, make sure you bait those abilities out first so you can actually deal damage. Alright, so be careful around popping core around Legion and Tone. But what about Scorch and Ion? They have shields as well. Well, thankfully, each shot of the Smart Core actually drains their shields when they're up, so you can actually tap fire to drain their shield, or if you have enough HP and you don't really care, you can just fully unload to deprive them of their defensive ability anyways. Now, another question you might ask is, should you use long range mode or close range mode when you Smart Core? Generally, the consensus is long range mode since you can bypass the 2 ammo requirement, you can see further, and with the reduced FOV, it also means that you can focus on one enemy since, well, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you target more than one enemy, your damage will be split. But the most important thing is that since you can still fire even if you're not targeting anybody, you're still free to shoot somebody that's out of range of your Smart Core. Although it may not come into play that often, it's still a great option to have over the short range mode. However, do note that your Powershot will still be a projectile, and Smart Core doesn't account for travel time or enemy movement, so you'll have to save it for closer ranges. So now that you've gotten to know Legion's gun up close and personal, it's time to dive into the kits. Starting with the universal ones, there's always going to be the 3 Stooges, aka the kits you should never choose when it comes to actually playing your Titan effectively. Assault Chip is quite simply the worst kit. Your Titan doesn't know how to core, aim properly, or position properly. Plus, you came to watch this guide because you wanted to actually play in your Titan, right? Second worst has got to be Stealth Auto Eject. Alongside essentially forfeiting an entire bar of health, you also lose the control of when you're able to eject. While you do get the added bonus of staying practically invisible to Titans, you can still get shot out of the air by Eagle Eye pilots. If you really want to stay safe during an eject, just run Stim, Grapple, Cloak, Phase, or hell, even Hollow Pilot. Up next is Nuclear Ejection. You don't have any tools to consistently hit people with it, plus you're fat. Yeah, sorry.
You've been fired from your job so you can't pay the bills, and by the way, your wife is leaving too.
Now the next 3 kits are the ones you'll actually want to choose from if you want to get the most out of your Titan. While having an extra smoke is useful, Legion doesn't really benefit from an extra electric smoke. It's not like Titans will be actively pushing you unless you're doomed, or you don't know what you're doing anyways since you have the option of Powershot as a deterrent. It's useful if you're getting rodeoed often, I guess, but everybody runs low profile, and again, you have Powershot, so well, what's the point? Overcore is great. By starting at 20%, Legion is able to get Smart Core with just 1 magazine. In fights against Ronin and Ion, this can be great since you can keep the relentless pressure up. However, if you equip this over Turbo Engine, which I'll talk about soon, you sacrifice your overall mobility, which will hurt against Titans like Northstar and especially Tone. Plus, mobility and getting around is integral to Legion's effectiveness, so if you want to get the most out of them, you'll want to go with Turbo Engine. Ordinarily, Legion's dash is a sluggish 10 seconds. When you're out there on the battlefield, that is a literal eternity. Plus, with how cumbersome your kit already is, with rev up times and such, not being able to have a dash when you really need it just feels plain terrible. That's why Turbo Engine is definitely a must pick for me. Since you're an ogre class, you don't get the second dash, but instead you gain a 50% cooldown on the one dash you do have. 5 seconds is a hell of a lot shorter than 10, and trust me, this kit is an absolute game changer in certain matchups. So please just pick this. Going to specific kits, thankfully all but one of Legion's kits are actually viable. Unlike when I went over the general kits, this time I'll go from best to worst. Hidden Compartment. Now, Hidden Compartment is no surprise, as it's easily the best out of all Legion's kits. While a 15% damage penalty sounds bad, if you do 2 power shots on a single enemy, you'll still end up doing more damage anyways. The second charge also allows you to be more lenient with your power shot, as now you can more readily throw it out to kill pilots or to damage and bait titans. Number 2, Lightweight Alloys. If you've already got some time on Legion, this may come as a surprise to you. Of all the other choices, how does this get second place? Well, here's the answer. Mobility. While the game doesn't outright tell you how much faster you become, I can. 42%. While this may sound like a weird number, it's actually pretty significant. With this amount of speed, it allows Legion to play more aggressively and not have to use his one dash to push corners, but instead he can simply walk around them. This kit also lets Legion disengage from fights without having to unrev the Predator Cannon, meaning enemies can't push him as effectively with the threat of damage. This is game changing against titans like Scorch and Tone, since now you can reliably push past a particle wall if you're close enough, and you can also back up from a flame shield while your gun is still revved up. All to say, this kit allows you to have so much more freedom when it comes to pushing and pulling away from fights. Number 3, Enhanced Ammo Capacity. An extra 40 bullets ain't bad. With this kit, you'll be able to fight longer, keep pressure longer, and most importantly, delay his reload, which is his largest punishment opportunity for enemies. But unfortunately, those 40 bullets don't make this kit take the edge over the other two, because Hidden Compartment has got it severely beaten in the raw damage department, and Lightweight Alloys is just more flexible. Number 4, Sensor Array. In my personal opinion, kits that solely affect the Titan's core are usually pretty bad or only situationally useful. Sensor Array falls into this category as it increases your smart core duration from 12 to 17 seconds. I'll be honest, against Titans it isn't really that great since 12 seconds is usually plenty of time to win a Titan fight. However, this kit turns your smart core into an even better zoning tool for pilots. This is especially great in modes like CTF or Hardpoint if you want to lock an objective down for an extended amount of time. Well, if you can even find a match of those modes. And finally, number 5, Bulwark. The only kit out of the 5 that I would consider to be completely
Useless.
While it doubles your gun shield's health, it doesn't fix any of the actual problems that gun shield suffers from. It'll still go down in one arc wave, you're still restricted from melee, and certain spots of your chassis will still be exposed. Plus, gun shield is already pretty sturdy enough from certain weapons, and if your opponent just ignores you and the gun shield, what's even the point? If you pick this, I guarantee you, you will have changed essentially nothing. Now, there are a lot of fun things to learn when it comes to Titanfall 2. Movement, the maps, different weapons, etc. But in my opinion, an underappreciated part of playing Titanfall 2 is the Titan matchups. And when it comes down to it, I think Legion is certainly up there when we talk about the interest factor and how dependent he is on the skill of the little guy piloting him. So before we dive into his one-on-one matchups, let's reiterate on what are essentially your 2 most important skills to hone: positioning and knowing your role. Now, I've already dedicated a whole section of the video talking about this exact thing, but trust me, it's really important. As Legion, a lot of your matchups are decided on where you're positioned, and if you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, the outcome of the fight can sometimes be already decided from the start. Knowing your role also ties into this as well. Being able to hold yourself back from a greedy push, or understanding that you need to stick by your team or objective, will definitely end up benefiting you in the long run, and is the key to extending your Titan's lifespan. Now, these 2 skills aren't something you'll pick up immediately, and if I had to be honest, Legion is quite honestly one of the hardest Titans to play since this kit can seem deceptively easy. However, perseverance is key, and if you take the time to master Legion, you'll soon see that he can be one of the best Titans to be in those Titan v Titan engagements.
Engaging hostile Titan. Calculating consumption for main weapon.
When it comes to this matchup, I think everybody can agree that Ion is the quintessential soft counter to Legion. While Ion's splitter rifle may not be much of a threat, the real danger comes in the form of Vortex Shield and the Laser Shot. At long ranges, Ion can use the precise aim of the Laser Shot to shoot past your gun shield, and Vortex Shield can be used to nullify your main source of damage, and even worse, throw it back at you. However, I think a lot of people are quick to assume that whenever this matchup does happen, it's an instant loss for the Legion, when in reality, he does perform better than you think. To start off, your first instinct may be to stay as far away from an Ion as you possibly can be, and if the Ion isn't really paying attention, then sure, maybe you can get away with a power shot or 2. But at a certain range, you'll be in the sweet spot of the laser shot. Good ions will bide their time whittling down at your weak spots, and of course, they'll block whatever you send at them. Meanwhile, they'll also likely use the available natural cover in their downtime to recover their energy, and rinse and repeat till you're dead. So instead of being at long range, you need to actually look for an opportunity to get right in their face. Now this sounds counterintuitive, but hear me out. If you didn't already know, Ion's energy level can be represented by the color of their vortex shield. Blue means it's basically full, yellow and orange means it's at the halfway point, and red means Ion's energy bar is close to empty. The key here is being able to participate in those mind games in order to bait out the energy shield as often as possible. And so you have two options here. The safer but longer option is to just play patiently, using light bursts of your Predator Cannon to slowly whittle down the Ion's health and energy. Option 2 is incorporating your Power Shot in between Vortex Shield uses as a heavy punish for the Ion's mistakes. This is definitely the more risky option, but if done right, it can drastically shorten the fight. Which is important, because Legion is pretty weak when it comes to fighting multiple opponents, and a drawn out fight in general just brings more trouble than it's worth.
You need to hang up that computer call. Come over here and kiss me on my hot mouth. I'm feeling romantic.
Some additional tips for this matchup are that Vortex Shield actually takes longer to redeploy if it just reflected something. So if you feed 2 bullets purposely and wait for Ion to reflect, you can get guaranteed shots or even a guaranteed power shot off due to the delay. The power shot guarantee definitely will take some practice though, as you have to observe your opponents quite carefully in order to get the optimal timing off. Dashes will be pretty important in this matchup too, and you'll want to save them for getting out from electric smoke or tripwires. I already talked about Smart Core earlier in the video, but saving it for an Ion can make it a pretty easy win since your core can drain energy. So you can tap fire as usual to safely drain the Vortex Shield, or if you're feeling confident, you can just mag dump the shield with it. Oh, and finally, don't forget, you have 5 bars of health. That means that you can actually tank a laser core. And considering the damage output you can do, if you can't make it to cover, it's perfectly fine to shoot back at the Ion since they'll be fully exposed and you can shred them with Power Shot and crits.
Engaging hostile Titan, priming offensive thermal systems.
In this matchup, Scorch usually doesn't become much of a problem. Your gun shield easily negates his only form of consistent damage, the thermite launcher, and funnily enough, you can also manage to block his firewall with your gun shield as well. However, this all changes when the enemy Scorch manages to either flank you or they end up in your face. When it comes to this matchup, your enemy number 1 will be the Flame Shield. In close range, a lot of people think that a Legion caught up in the close clutches of a Scorch equals an instant loss. But in reality, like with Ion, Legion can actually hold his own even in these types of situations. So let's break down the Flame Shield. Despite also being a shield, the Thermal Shield actually deploys slower than the Vortex Shield, which means more time to punish with a well-timed Power Shot. The Flame Shield is also smaller. Well, actually it's more like Scorch is too big. When his shield is up, it turns out his big fat right toe is exposed, meaning if a Scorch is barreling towards you with his shield at the ready, you can actually close range Power Shot, which will knock them back, and you can dash at the same time that makes some considerable distance. Plus, there's also the knockback of melee if you got nothing left, or if the Scorch is too close. Now granted, Scorch can crouch to block those bullets, but that's good news for you since that means Scorch will be either forced to retreat since he'll be too slow to catch up to you, or he'll have to take a lot more damage in the end to try and get to you. But if you're not feeling confident, you can always equip lightweight alloys, which will allow you to back up faster than a Scorch can push you with his shield up. Hopefully though, if you're aware enough and you just play in your optimal Scorch bullying range of medium to long distance, you'll do just fine.
Engaging hostile Titan. Railgun at maximum power.
Northstar can be a tough opponent to face as this matchup is all about positioning knowledge. To put it simply, if you know where the Northstar is before she knows where you are, you have options. If it's the opposite, then good luck. Northstar is a relatively nimble Titan, and since she also has the benefit of tethers and being able to zoom in for accuracy, it can be hard to get the jump on her. And if you know there's a Northstar around, make sure to remember this golden rule. Never engage her without your gun shield. Northstar does insane damage if left unchecked, and considering your size, you're just a big and meaty target to farm core off. So being able to block even just one railgun shot is really important. Now let's talk about the actual engagement options. If you manage to get into a close range flank, the obvious answer is to sink as much damage as you can before she can dash away. So make sure you use those power shots. If you get caught up in tether traps however, don't be afraid. If you have your E-smoke and deploy it, it'll immediately break the traps holding you so that you'll be able to push forward. Also, if they hover, that's going to be your easiest target of opportunity for damage, so make sure you take advantage of that. And speaking of advantage, the biggest one you have is definitely your massive health pool. Trading a railgun shot for a long range power shot is usually always worth it, considering that one of these power shots is basically a third of Northstar's health gone. So if you play around this idea of dishing out more than you can receive, you'll be fine. Some other things to note is that the dashing Powershot tech will be highly important to use, since if you know a Northstar is around a corner, she doesn't have any defensive abilities to protect her, and even if she did, it'll be pretty much impossible to react to unless a Northstar just magically predicts you. Cluster Missile is also important to look out for, since your slow speed and huge size can be really punishing if you get caught out with it. That's why Northstar will usually throw it out when your gun shield is up, so it's important to save a dash to either continue pushing up, or to back away if needed. And finally, don't be afraid to engage a Flight Core if you've got enough HP. Along with Gun Shield, you have more than enough damage and health to completely gun down the fool who thought they could kill you. And even if you don't, if you can manage to hit one good power shot during it, it's still a very solid chunk of damage.
Engaging hostile Titan, 40mm armed to paint and destroy.
Tone is Legion's hard counter. There's not really any way around it. Their whole existence is to basically deny yours. Tone, with a battery, overcore, and rocket barrage, can get salvo core and 3 tracking rocket uses. The tracking rocket barrages can also delete your gun shield in one burst. Considering that you're big and slow, it's super easy for these enemy tones to completely destroy your health bar when you're not looking. So don't be surprised when I say a lot of this matchup is all about positioning and avoiding the lock-ons, which at this point, I'm sure you can guess the best way to fight a tone is again,
It's a lot easier to kill a guy and didn't even know you were there.
Enemy number 1 here will be the particle wall. For starters, always keep track of its usage and downtime, and do not attempt to shoot down the wall. You're not getting past it.
Yeah!
Good tones will heavily abuse this fact, and just like you and Northstar, these guys will usually only engage you if they have their defensive ability up, aka the particle wall. With a wall up, you have 2 options: retreat or to push through. I'll be honest, most of the time here, you're gonna be retreating. Getting close to enemies is already hard enough as Legion, and if you're not within dashing distance, you're guaranteed to get shredded if you fail to get past the shield. Plus, Tone's prime range is the mid to long range, and the shield is what allows her to wreak havoc on you for free. But if the stars align and you're able to push up far enough, you actually will be able to heavily punish a Tone for misplacing the shield and not keeping far away from you. Other than that, dash power shots are great to use here. Lightweight alloys will be your number 1 friend for this matchup. You can block the majority of salvo core and can even despawn the core itself if you're close enough with your gun shield, and you should actually wait to power shot if you're at a distance, because usually, Tones will wait to deploy the particle wall to react to said power shot.
Engaging hostile Titan, closing for the kill.
In a regular 1v1, Legion can usually take down the average Ronin, but don't be fooled. Ronin is one of the most powerful Titans in the game, and those with experience can eat you and spit you back out like it's nothing.
Them $200 bullets ain't so hot when they don't hit nothing, are they?
So here's what you should take note of in this matchup. 1. The skill of the Ronin. 2. What you can do. And 3. Your positioning. Diving into the skills of Ronin, you should know that Ronin has access to something called Crouch Tech. To put it simply, this tech allows Ronin a lot more flexibility when it comes to using Sword Block. With Crouch Tech, Power Shot becomes 100% reactable, and this means Legion has to find his damage elsewhere. Of course, Ronins will still have to respect your power shot, but any good Ronin won't be rushing in front of you 24/7. Usually they'll find an opportunity to try and flank, they'll rush you if they know you're reloading, or if they're actually wearing a headset. Ronins will be able to discern the audio cue of you using long range mode and punish you heavily for not having access to close range power shot, and only having access to half of your usual magazine. Oh, and of course, Sword Core can completely destroy you if the Ronin knows how to actually block with their sword, and Arc Wave can one-shot your gun shield. So, what can you do? Well, here, enhanced ammo capacity will be your saving grace if you keep getting harassed. Not only do you get the extra benefit of added bullets, you get less downtime on your gun, and the ability to get your smart core in one magazine. However, if you notice the Ronin constantly getting in front of you and they don't use Crouch Tech, Hidden Compartment will be better, since you can easily land more consistent power shots as a punish tool. So if you know there's a Ronin running around, it might be best to save that power shot. Arc Wave is also something you should look out for, and usually you don't want to pop it when you first see a Ronin, because again, it can one-shot it out of existence. The key here is waiting until the Ronin starts shooting at you with the lead wall, or if the Arc Wave comes out first. This way, you can hopefully max out your chances of your gun shield actually doing something. Finally, there's also Sword Core. If you didn't already know, you can completely cancel out a Ronin's core if you time your melee hits to essentially box them out. If you can't shoot your way out fast enough, this will be an essential skill to learn, and plus, if you activate Smart Core, your melee damage will be boosted. Closing out, as long as you stay aware and you can anticipate a Ronin while you're in your close range mode, you'll do just fine.
I'm engaging a hostile Titan. XO-16 armed to kill.
Out of all the matchups, Monarch is the most straightforward and the easiest one to win. Due to her lack of major damage mitigation, she does get wrecked by your power shots whenever she does try to attack you. In reality, the most Monarch can really do is tickle you for a free siphon shot, and no matter how many upgrades she's got, your Predator Cannon will always give you the edge in the straight 1v1. However, don't treat Monarch as an easy win. Rocket Salvo can still decently damage your shield if all the rockets hit, and while the XO16 isn't as accurate as the Predator cannon, it's still a hit scan gun that can be used to shoot your exposed spots with your shield up. Also, don't get greedy, especially if you know a Monarch has been alive for quite a bit. These days, a lot of Monarchs run Maelstrom, so getting caught in that E-smoke during a push can be especially punishing. So if you save a dash for that and just aim for crits and power shots, you'll be fine.
Engaging enemy Titan. Optimizing ammo feed efficiency.
When it comes down to it, Legion versus Legion all comes down to who can use their gun shield better. If gun shield didn't exist, then a lot of Legion's battles would just come down to this. And don't get me wrong, a lot of the time it'll still end up like that, but hey, trust me, it's very, very nuanced. Anyways, like with Northstar, don't try to engage a fellow Legion without your gun shield. It's literally a free damage blocker, and if you manage to catch a Legion with their pants down without their shield, it's pretty much a free win. If you end up face to face, the Legion who uses gun shield first will usually win because they'll get it back first, but don't jump the gun. It can be better to use it to block a power shot on reaction. Also, in those close-ups, make sure you aim for crits since Legion is so big. Make sure you also time your smart core for when the Legion's shield is down, because otherwise, your core will be essentially nullified since it aims for center mass. Other than that, the matchup comes down to knowing your weak spots, how they aim for the enemy's weak spots, and of course, positioning and timing of your gun shield. And that's all the matchups. However, it's not just Titans you have to worry about. Because of how slow Legion is, the unfortunate truth is that it's really easy to gang up on him with a few pilots. So let's talk about the anti-Titan weapons. The weakest one is not surprisingly the MGL. The MGL requires pilots to be in close range, which is Powershot territory, and while you can shoot over rooftops and around corners, the MGL just doesn't do enough damage while the Legion moves away. Now the other three anti-Titan weapons all have their place in making Legion's life a bit harder. Both the Thunderbolt and the Archer can be used to bait out a gun shield unless Legion wants to take a decent amount of damage. Of course, Thunderbolt is easier to use in close to medium ranges, and the Archer is better for long range. The Charge Rifle though can be the most potent out of the four if used ideally. In maps like Homestead with open sightlines, the Charge Rifle can be used to precisely target the weak areas of Gun Shield, and once Gun Shield is down, the Charge Rifle can farm crit hits pretty consistently. As for grenades, Legion is a prime target, especially when he's revved up. If you're not paying attention, it can be very easy for a pilot to detonate a double satchel charge, stick you with a Firestar or an Arc Grenade, or they can harass you with an E-Smoke. There's also the honorable mention of the SMR, which can shred your big body if it's amped. For my advice, remember to stay vigilant and to stay conscious of areas you'll know you have a hard time reaching with your bullets or fist. Usually this means playing close but not too close to cover, and avoiding buildings with windows and such. So now we can finally talk about some tips and tricks for Legion. And remember, if you want the chance to get featured in this section of the video, make sure you keep an eye out in my Discord for when I open up the designated channel. Number 1. Commit to your reloads. The most vulnerable time for a Legion is when he reloads. Save for activating his gun shield, there's not much a Legion can do to protect himself when he starts it. Plus, if he needs to use his gun right after, he still needs to rev up his gun, which can be further delayed if he wants to go for a power shot. That's why it's really important to position your reload in safe areas, and also try not to melee during it since you'll have to start the animation all over again. The only time you should be meleeing during a reload is if a Ronin is sword coring you, if you're close enough for an execution, or if you need to make some space from a Scorch. Gun shield slow cancel. This second tip comes from Chill Spirit over on the Discord. If you're ever in a bad spot while you have gun shield up, you can reload or switch gun mode to get back to your regular movement speed for the duration of the animation. As I already explained before, gun shield locks you into really slow movement, so if you accidentally fat finger the shield in a bad spot, the extra speed by doing this tech can be the edge you need to round a corner or wall. Number 3. Triple Power Shot. Now don't be fooled, while this may seem overpowered and game breaking, there are actual drawbacks for performing this. I'll leave a link to the original video where this was referenced from, but basically, to activate this glitch, press the Power Shot button right after the screen begins to fade during an embark. You can also just spam the button if you're lazy. And boom! Now you're holding a power shot that can be fired at any time. Of course, a power shot charge will still be used as indicated by the ability going on cooldown in the bottom left, but if you're patient, this means that you can fire a power shot 2 times in quick succession, or 3 times if you're running hidden compartment. So then, where are the downsides? Well, in this glitch state, you can't melee, disembark, mode switch, and of course, you can't use your regular rounds. This can definitely be a problem if you use this in the wrong area in the wrong time. You also can't use gun shield because it'll force you to ADS, which in turn forces you to shoot your power shot. And so whether you decide to incorporate this into your gameplay, just be aware that it's not entirely positive and Legion can function just fine without it. Number 4. Use your minimap! This next tip comes from Edge Dancer TSS on the Discord. A lot of people really underestimate the value this minimap brings, and as Legion, getting as much info as you can will most definitely save you from an unwarranted death, even if you don't realize it. If you actually pay attention to your surroundings and the minimap, you can always ensure you're in a good position, or at least you can try to. Number 5. Always aim for critical spots. If you're planning to main Legion, it can be appealing to shut off your brain and to just shoot ahead with no thought whatsoever. But Legion is a Titan who thrives off precision, especially considering that he's one of the only Titans with a hit scan primary. To put it simply, if you're not putting in the work to land those juicy criticals, you're gutting the efficiency of your Titan by a lot. And yeah, that's basically Legion. If you're a heavy weapons guy, feel free to comment any extra tips and tricks down below. I also want to give a massive shout out to Burn. They basically shadow wrote this video, and they were a massive help in helping me understand Legion as a whole. As always, we've got networks on all platforms on Titanfall 2. Just search up Reach's Conrads or the clan tag Crvyy and you'll find us. On that note, if you haven't noticed already, I also try to stream Titanfall 2 every weekend, so definitely come and stop by to say hello. If you want updates on what I'm currently doing or plan on doing, keep an eye on my community tab in Discord where I'll post polls and different threads. And if you want a little something extra, feel free to support me through memberships on YouTube. As always, I appreciate you guys for sticking around, and I'll see ya in the next one. Peace.